Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us for our Bible study on the book of James. Today we are going to be talking about James chapter 3 verses 1 through 12, and I'm going to begin by reading James chapter 3 verse 2 in the New Living Translation. Indeed, we all make many mistakes, for if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect and could also control ourselves in every other way. I think we've all heard, and you could finish it for me, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. While we all know these words and could recite them by heart, we also all know how incredibly untrue these words actually are. When I was in kindergarten, I fell and broke my arm, and throughout the rest of my elementary career would continue to visit the emergency room on several other occasions. While I cannot remember the pain of those specific injuries, I can easily recall the pain of unkind words that were spoken to me, potentially years after they were spoken. Our mouths hold incredible power, and that is what James is trying to communicate in these first 12 verses of chapter 3. As he begins his dialogue on the power of the tongue, he begins to talk about the power in small things. He uses the example of a bit in the mouth of a horse and the rudder of a ship. I want you to pause and consider for one moment how powerful those items actually are. The bit in the mouth of a horse can take a powerful racehorse and stop it on a dime. The rudder of a ship can turn this large vessel that can overcome currents and waves and turn it wherever the captain wants it to go. The power in these items have great effect, almost disproportionately so. James continues on to talk about how untamable the tongue actually is. He uses the example of how quickly one spark can create this great forest fire, something that in recent events we have seen is incredibly untamable. He poses the question that I want us to consider. We can domesticate almost any animal, and yet we cannot tame our tongues. There is a disproportionate, untamable power within our mouths, the power of the tongue. And while this is all very true and we understand, maybe not fully, but on some level understand how much power there is in our mouths, it begs the question, why is he even talking about this? Why does this matter? In Matthew 12:34, Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The mouth gives a very clear picture of what is going on in our hearts. And James is communicating this same concept when he talks about a bad tree bearing good fruit or salt water coming from a freshwater spring, and that this hypocrisy cannot be. When we as Christ followers allow negativity and death to come out of our mouths, we are allowing our uncontrollable, our untamable, our disproportionately powerful mouths to prove what is actually going on inside of our hearts. James is calling us to a higher standard of integrity, saying that out of the same mouth should not come blessing and cursing. Out of the same mouth should not come life and death. Why? Because if the mouth is the picture of the heart, you cannot have both life and death in your heart. And so if you are going to tame the tongue, you must allow God to first purify your heart. If you are going to tame your tongue, you have to allow God to purify your heart, because it is out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. If there is hypocrisy coming out of your mouth, if you are saying blessing and cursing out of the same mouth, there are areas of your heart that need to be purified by God. And this is my first application question, this first question of how to apply James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12 to your own life. What areas in your life do you need God to purify your heart? Your mouth will help you determine that. If there are things coming out of your mouth that are not godly, that are not honoring to Him and to His will and His standards for our lives, there is an area where you need God to purify your heart. And out of that, I would ask my second application question. What is your mouth saying about the state of your heart? What is your mouth saying about what's going on in your heart? If there are areas that your mouth is showing that you need more life, that you need more holiness, then I will say to you, allow God to purify your heart so that what comes out of your mouth, this powerful, disproportionately so powerful thing that we have, our tongues. Allow God to purify your heart so that what comes out of your mouth can then become controlled, can then be tamed. We can only do this through the power of God. And as we do that, we will be able to live pure and holy lives, just as James talks about in verse 2 of chapter 3.